Hello again, Year 9 historians. It's time to talk about the conscription issue. Yeah, so remember I told you that Australia was the only country in World War One that had a purely voluntary army? Well, as the war went on, less and less people wanted to volunteer, and so it became an issue. Do we have conscription? Conscription is compulsory military service. Do we have conscription so that we can get more soldiers? And that was the question. That's the conscription issue. Our learning goals today, and there are 3. You're going to know what conscription is. You're going to know arguments for and against conscription. And you're going to be able to think from the perspective of people from history. We're going to do a little activity using the historical thinking concept, perspectives. Okay, conscription. It's a divisive issue. Yeah, it divided Australians. Some were for conscription, some were against it. Some wanted volunteers only to join the army. Some realised there's not enough volunteers, we need to force people to join. Okay, so as I said, conscription means being forced to join the military. Some wanted conscription in Australia because Australia was the only country in the world with completely volunteer army, and there were less and less volunteers. Yeah, so Australia had committed to sending soldiers to help Britain in World War One. They weren't getting enough volunteers, so some people thought we need to introduce conscription. The issue divided Australia. There were a couple of votes on it, and they were very, very close. So I want you to copy down this table. These are the arguments for and against. So for conscription, for why we should force people to join the military during World War One, because we have a duty to Great Britain, because others do it, every single other country had conscription, and there's this thing called equality of sacrifice. When only volunteers were joining the army, it was more likely to be people from poorer backgrounds. Okay, so one of the reasons why Australian young men went to World War One was because they were unemployed, and then they knew if in the military they would get money, and they wouldn't need to spend that money when they were out fighting, so they would have a good deal of savings when they came back to Australia. Okay, the idea behind conscription is that everybody, so people from rich or poor backgrounds, would all have to have an equal chance of having to go and join the military. Conscription doesn't necessarily mean every single person has to join the military, but it means that there's some kind of fair way to do it. So like in the US during the Vietnam War, conscription was done by ballot. So they'd put all the names of everybody, and then they'd just pull random names out. If your name came out, boom, you got to go to Vietnam. Okay, arguments against conscription. There was the moral, ethical argument put forward that you really shouldn't be forcing people to join the military, because essentially you're forcing people to go and kill people, and that seems unethical. Another argument was that it would mean a loss of workers. Yeah, all of those men who would be conscripted into the army would then not be working at home in Australia, so who's going to keep the country running? Hint, woman. Anyway, another argument against conscription was that there were too many dead already. Yeah, so there was a huge death toll for all of these battles, especially in in all parts of World War One, and with all these death notices being announced in the newspaper all the time, and parents finding out about their sons dying, it made conscription seem very unpopular. Let's have a look at some posters. So here is a poster saying vote no for conscription, and the little boy coming up to his mum, vote no mum, they'll take dad next. Yep. So that's exciting that women got to vote. Actually, women were voting in Australia by this point. So essentially, that's what kind of persuasion are we seeing there? That's emotional, yeah? It's appealing to the emotions of the mother, because to say, you know, kids are worrying that their father might die if they go to war, so vote no to conscription, and then he won't have to. Here's another one. This is pro-conscription. Before you cast your vote, just think what the Kaiser would like it to be. The Kaiser Wilhelm II, I think it was. He was the leader of Germany at the time. So the idea being there, obviously the Kaiser doesn't want you to vote conscription because he doesn't want to see any more Australian soldiers in the battle. So surely you can't want the same thing as the Kaiser, so you better vote in favour of conscription. Now this is interesting. This is using the same emotional persuasive technique, but arguing for the opposite side of the conscription debate. God bless dear daddy who is fighting the Hun. The Hun is just a slang term for the Germans. God bless dear daddy who is fighting the Hun and send him help. Yeah. So the idea that by sending more Australian soldiers into World War I, it would protect the Australian soldiers that we've already sent there, and therefore we should have conscription. And this one here, our scrap of paper. So Andrew Fisher, who was the Prime Minister at the start of World War I, we will fight to the last man and the last shilling. Yep. So that's the scrap of paper that was, they're pretending that was the one that was given to Britain. Maybe it was, I don't know. Anyway, so vote yes for the referendum. They're calling it a reinforcements referendum. That's sneaky, rather than using the word conscription. So, many people opposed conscription, and this is why. A lot of those people who were against it thought it was unfair, and it would be mostly working class people fighting, not rich people. Yeah. So, even though one of the arguments that was supposed to be in favour of conscription was that it would mean equality of sacrifice, what these people were saying was, yeah, but come on, we know the powerful run the system, so even if you have conscription, you're only going to conscript or force working class people to join the military. That was their reasoning. Also, Irish Australians. So Ireland and Great Britain have got this past, a very, very dodgy past, and Great Britain, not only did it capture the northern part of Ireland, which is still part of Great Britain, not Ireland, there was also a lot of fighting in the last sort of 100 years earlier between Ireland and Great Britain, and Ireland have some very negative memories about the way they were treated by Great Britain. And so, because it was Britain saying send troops over, Irish Australians were like, nah. Here's a few more posters here. So this one's about vote no. They're calling it the death ballot. Yeah. So you see the persuasive techniques. The two different sides are using different words to describe even what the vote was about. Yeah. These guys are against conscription, saying you should vote no, and they're calling it the death ballot. The idea that if you vote yes, then you're sending people to their death because you're forcing them to join the army or the military. And here's another one. Keep Australia white and free, vote no. Somehow they've worked race into that, and you can see lots of Asian people pouring in from the north. It's a pretty random argument, but anyway. People were racist back then, so they thought, let's cash in on that and try to use their racism to make them vote no for conscription. Oh, I know why. Because Australia was the only country that had a free army. Yeah, so it's all about their freedom. If Australia forced people to join the military, they wouldn't be free. They would be like these other countries that we don't like Asian ones. I think that's the interpretation. If it's not, I apologise. So the people decided. They had a vote on it. Should we have conscription? They had a referendum, which is a public vote to see if a law should pass. In 1916, it did not pass. So they had another one in 1917. Again, it did not pass. So the people had spoken. Twice! So this is the actual ballot paper from the first referendum, called the Military Service Referendum Act. This was something that voters from Western Australia would have voted on. Yeah, and the question is, are you in favour of the government having compulsory powers over citizens in regard to requiring their military service for the term of this war? Yep, so they're saying, do you want to allow the government to force people to join the military during this war? Yes, no. And people, it was close, but the no's won in 1916 and again in 1917. Okay, so a really important historical thinking concept is being able to take on the perspective of people from history. It's very tricky to try to. We can look at photos of people from the past and we can read what they did, but trying to get inside their heads, that is something else altogether. We often see movies that show historical movies where the costumes are perfect and the battles are perfect, and yet they have really modern thinking. Okay, so what I want you to do in this activity is I want you to imagine that you are a person from the past, not now. Now the activity, so you're going to copy in. It's not a table, it's just answering 1 or 2 sentences about these 3 things. So imagine that you are from this group or this person, and what's your view on conscription on World War One? If you were the Australian government, if you were the Prime Minister of Australia during World War One, what would your view on conscription be? If you were a 19-year-old bored teenage boy, what would your view on conscription be? If you're a mum with 3 sons, what might your view on conscription be? And if you were the boss of a factory, what might your views on conscription be? So write 1 or 2 sentences under each of those headings about what you think their views on conscription would be. Okay, our first video today is Conscription, World War One terms. Take it away.
Welcome to another video on World War I terms. Today we're going to be looking at the term conscription. Conscription is where citizens of a country are automatically signed up, or conscripted, to take part in compulsory military service. There were 2 types of conscription during World War I, universal conscription and the lottery system. Countries such as Germany already had universal conscription. It basically stated once males reached a certain age, usually 18, they'd have to go off and receive 1 or 2 years compulsory service and training. The benefit of this was a huge reserve force who could be called up to action at any stage, and they'd already have a basic level of training. The other version of conscription was the lottery system. This is where birth dates are randomly selected and these men are called up to begin basic training. This is what Britain did during World War I when they could not get enough volunteer recruits. It was also attempted in many of Britain's colonies. In Australia, a strong advocate for this level of conscription was Prime Minister Billy Hughes. It was decided, as this was quite a divisive issue, to put it to the people as a referendum. This was an issue that most Australians felt very strongly about, and it literally split the country in half to opposing yes and no forces. It was actually put to the people twice. But both times it failed to receive the numbers, and conscription was not put in place, making Australian forces voluntary throughout the entire war period. So that's conscription. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Our second video today is an instructional video. This person looks at some World War One propaganda and analyzes it. It's very interesting. Check it out.
Hi Year 9, in this flip video we'll be learning to analyse propaganda. Year 9, here you can see a propaganda poster from World War One. The first task you need to complete when analysing propaganda posters is to identify what you actually see. This flip video will teach you how to do this now. The first thing I can see is a kangaroo. The second thing I recognise is the number 50,000. Right across the propaganda poster. The third thing that grabs my attention is the silhouette, which highlights Australian soldiers eagerly going to battle, as we can see in the background here. On the poster there is also persuasive language. The next phase of analysing a piece of propaganda is to identify the symbols you can see. We're back at the kangaroo. This is because the kangaroo draws on Australia's young history as a nation. The next symbol is the silhouette of the soldiers all going to war together. This symbolises that the men that will be joining will not be alone, and there is a sense of camaraderie. The third symbol is the colours of red and black. These colours capture the audience attention. The last phase of analysing a propaganda poster is to identify the language that has been used. As we can see, Australia has promised Britain 50,000 more men. Will you help us keep that promise? Australia is certain on keeping this promise. They are so certain on keeping this promise that they've used the repetition of promise twice in the same poster. Let's analyse another propaganda poster from World War I, just so that we can really understand how to do this. On this poster, I see an Australian soldier. In the background, I can see a map of Turkey, specifically the Dardanelles. From my prior knowledge, I also know the Dardanelles is a place where Australians fought. I can also see that there is persuasive language yet again. I'm now going to identify symbols. Symbol 1. Let's consider how the soldier is presented in this poster. The soldier is fit, he's strong, obviously well equipped, and he looks quite healthy. Symbol 2 is how large the soldier actually is. This emphasizes the ability to stand over the enemy, as he is standing on the map of the Dardanelles in Turkey. We'll also look at the language used for this poster. Cooee is a colloquial term. This engages the audience of the time with a common term that they can recognize. This is similar to us saying something like oi. They're asking the audience a question, won't you come here? So they are directly speaking to the audience. And by saying won't you come, it is a call to action, along with enlist now. It's now your turn. Using the propaganda poster that you have been given, you will need to annotate what you see, the symbolism of the poster, and the language used. Good luck.
Your reflection activity today, I want you to give me a plus, minus, interesting. So one statement that's plus in favour, one that's minus, and one that's interesting. The topic, conscription in World War I, give me one plus, one minus, and one interesting. Do it. Woo! Homework time. Okay. Just answer these questions. Remember to include the question in your answer so it makes sense as a sentence when you read it back later. 1. Why were some people against conscription? So your answer is going to be, some people were against conscription because... 2. Why were some people for conscription? And 3. Was conscription passed into law in Australia during World War I? I don't know. Well, I do, but I'm sure you do too. So there you go. That's your homework. For those people who are keen as beans, here's a little bit of bonus homework for you. Read chapter 8.11 in your Jacaranda History Alive 9 Victorian, or whatever edition it is, textbook. And watch this. bit.ly/conscription 2020. It's a video about conscription in World War I. It's cool. It's not very long. Thank you so much for taking part in this lesson, and as I always say, keep it real.